So I believe my screen should be showing now, so I'll jump straight into it. I'm Dharshun Sridharan from Australia. I actually co-founder of Piston Labs and work at KPMG Australia in technology advisory. But I guess that's not the important part. The important part here is around the ability for, I guess, humans to be augmented through robotics, especially when you're talking about robotic exploration and in dangerous conditions. We don't want to be one of those single planet species. We want to be multi-planet species. And that's a quote that I'm pretty sure that many of you would have heard over the last little while. And I think it's a great way for me to open up this presentation because it sets the scene about what I'm really talking about and what is important at the end of the day. Underpinning this message is actually another message. There's a thread here around the ability for human or humanity to research and explore and do something that today we haven't done before, but something that becomes a pure kind of something that's ingrained in ourselves going forward. Curiosity is ingrained in us all, and so is the desire to explore. And that's something that, if anything, over the last 6 months during this COVID pandemic, we've been constrained with. And the reason I mention that is we're currently living in the year 2021, and it's soon going to be 2022. And if you look at everything that we've done within the last 12 months, even through this pandemic, it's quite extraordinary. However, as we look forward, we've got to continue to look backwards. We need to find out what those risks and failures were, because effectively the way we overcome that is what's going to define us, you and I, humanity as a whole. In our vast history, many civilizations have been drawn by two things: curiosity and desire, specifically relating to learning new things, really pushing the boundaries. And this, in terms of what we're speaking about today, includes exploration. We've moved from the trees, expanded across the land before taking to the oceans and the seas. And what I mean by this is our ancient voyages, which included the Phoenicians, may have traveled all the way to Britain by foot, by ship, whatever that may be. Hecataeus, a Greek geographer, explored Egypt and Africa, but also drew a map of his expeditions. And there was also Zheng He, who navigated west to Ceylon, which is now known as Sri Lanka, Arabia, and East Africa. And so with the oceans explored, we took to the skies and flew. That was the Wright brothers. And then before you knew it, we actually made our way to space, in Yuri Gagarin being one of the first to really unlock what the potential is. But with curiosity comes great risks. And these risks are stuff that we kind of need to learn to deal with. There are periods in our history where the acceptance of these have resulted in major gains and major accomplishments, such as Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. But there's also other cases where it's been less than fulfilling because it's ended up in disastrous consequences. But what is risk? In our daily lives, we all assume multiple levels of risk. We get into cars, we get into airplanes, some of us far too often, but maybe not in the last 6 months. One way or another, these represent different risks that we begin to tolerate and accept. Most of us mitigate these risks in some measure by doing things like wearing seatbelts, using governance agencies such as the FAA to govern what we can and can't do, getting physical checkups. These are small things that we do, so we get accustomed to the risk, whether we realize it or not. There's also monetary risk, economic, programmatic. There's a number of different categories. But if we pull this all the way back to one of the most important stuff, there is a risk to life, and you can't really put a price to that. So we need to look at what risks are acceptable, both for the individual and companies or institutions that are responsible for future exploration. While the first two are important, monetary, economic, I think the biggest one is actually the risk to life. So when we're heading into space, there's always going to be that chance that there is going to be a Challenger disaster occur, or a spacecraft's going to be hit by debris and unfiltered radiation. So this becomes a bit of a problem. So what does this actually mean for humanity? Does it mean we actually stop? Well, I don't think so. And I don't think anyone in this conference would say the same thing. We can't ignore the risks, but we also can't ignore our own curiosity and desire to explore. And so to quote another series of quotes, we may be the first civilization to prevent our own extinction. So why wouldn't we actually try? So what are we going to actually do with these risks? Well, we mitigate that. We mitigate these risks by augmenting our capabilities or our constrained capabilities. And if there's something that like our civilization can be proud of over the last 20, 30, 600 years, etc., is that where we find a weakness, we find a way around it. We find a way to augment that. And prosthetics is probably a great example of this, because Just because you're disabled doesn't mean your life stops. We found a way around that. So what does this actually mean? We do continue on to the next destination, whether it be the moon, Mars, maybe it's Titan in the future. But there are a number of difficulties in getting to Mars in the first place. And to be honest, this isn't the crux of what this presentation is about, but it really sets the scene of what we're going to be, I guess, faced with. So the fact that you've got a 7-month journey and communication delays means that we are going to have some difficulties getting there. And whether it be isolation impacts or spacecraft, etc., there are a couple of things that will go against us. So getting to Mars is going to be hard. Going to Mars and living there is going to be hard. Leaving the planet is also going to be harder because we haven't actually done that yet. So realistically, nothing's going to be easy. But our robots have actually got there. We've still got perseverance and curiosity driving around. And as far as we know, they're still functioning quite nominally. So it is doable. We have got there. It just humans haven't got there yet. So to bring it back to the core point, these challenges mean that we need to find a way to overcome these. And you and I may not be able to do it ourselves, but together we are unlocking that capability that does let us get to Mars and beyond. So what are the options to us if we decide to go to Mars, and where does that actually leave us? And can we actually do that, or are we constrained? Well, we're only really just at the beginning of that curve. We're starting. You look at the last decade and there's been an exponential growth in the use of robotics in every single industry, whether it be education, mining, finance, space. Robotics are being used in some way or another. And this may be in the realm of physical robots or logical robots, automation using another term. It's being deployed everywhere. And so you start to begin to really think about the key themes: robotics, autonomous systems, artificial intelligence. They become quite 3 of the pillars that we need to really master going forward. Because after all, having several temporary missions to Mars and beyond, which may be life-threatening, gets a bit difficult and intolerable. So the word robotics has multiple meanings, but for this purpose, I'm going to create my own. Robotics are a mechanism to augment humanity, achieve objectives that may be harmful, dangerous, or go against the very nature of who we are. Robotics is the ability that actually begins to be unlocked every single day, and there's advancements across the world. Doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in, someone's doing something really innovative. So you look at Mars right now, and you could be argued that the solar system, but specifically Mars, being inhabited by robots is actually the pinnacle of every single technology we have to date at this point in time. And similarly, autonomous systems is just another way to think of robotics, in the sense that you're putting more smarts into robots to make it work autonomously. You kind of don't want to be able to completely remote it from or control it from Earth all the time. And the Tesla bot insinuates this. AI is still relatively new. It's not as advanced as we need to be, but people are working on it. And so you start to think about the combination of robotics, autonomous systems, hard artificial intelligence, where effectively it is thinking for itself. It's thinking like you and I are, as in terms of humans. So that's what we're going for. Robotics for the enablement of zero harm to humans. But I guess it can be argued, and people can ask the question, is there anything already happening? Is there much progression in this area? Well, actually there is. Everyone, I'm sure, has seen Boston Dynamics, Spot, and Big Dog. That's a great example of what we've been able to do. We've moved from wheeled robots to legged robots, which are relatively and pretty well stable. And so you've got organizations within Australia, where I'm from, where we're actually using these dogs to detect and do asset maintenance and detect lethal gases. You don't want to put a human in that position. And if you remember back in the old days, we'd put the canary there. We don't need to do that anymore. Rio Tinto's autonomous train program, BHP's autonomous haulage trucks. These are examples where you've got a human back in a control center, but they're not in the line of fire. They're not in the dangerous situations that may cause driver fatigue or terrain that makes these vehicles tip over. And then you've got the Tesla Gigafactory, entirely automated, great throughput, quality is really standard. So these are some of the risks and specific examples that offset these risks that are happening today. And at the heart, they actually solve a problem. There is one downside. These work in a single use case scenario. They don't work in multiple. And what I mean by multiple is, you and I, we might go clean clothes this weekend. We might go bake a cake the next day. we might go fly a drone. There's no robot that can really do all of that in the one hit. And that's really one of the biggest things we need to crack. There are two blockers that I see. And one of it is really around the fact that these technologies are still maturing. And so there are a number of weaknesses that we're still working through. But the second one is they are single use case driven. And that is one of the biggest things. Our technologies need to mature, not only from a power perspective, but a sustainability perspective. But we have great progress in the past to show that we are getting there. If not, we have gotten there in certain industries. But secondly, that robotic device to be fully, I guess, proactive about what risks are coming up, it needs to augment humanity by being proactive than we are. And this isn't a massive problem in terms of data processing, but it means that it needs to emulate the risks and the peripheral vision and all the different things that we do without even thinking about it and making that decision faster than we ever could. But at the moment, most robots are single use case. Robot vacuums vacuum, autonomous drones fly. You don't really see a robot vacuum that can fly at the moment. At least I haven't seen many. So cracking this paradigm is quite high up on the list of things that needs to be done. And there are others as well that form the category 2 requirements, which are, it needs to be able to fail safe. So in the event that something happens, it can't just explode in front of you, because then what are you going to do with the human that's around you? It needs to be fault tolerant. It needs to be secure. It needs to fail gracefully. And ideally, it needs to be fault tolerant. Everyone would love a system that never fails, but I'm yet to see one in my own profession that hasn't failed. But we'll flip the lens. We'll now start talking about specifically how this relates to Mars before we talk about a specific design. So we've seen perseverance and curiosity as they currently stand, and they're great at working with many of these issues. And so you'd kind of argue that these are quite accomplished already. So the ability to deal with different types of terrain, dust storms to prevent clockages in the actuators and the gears, corrosion and rust prevention. How do you withstand Mars or Mars quakes, cold temperatures, hot temperatures, radiation exposure, sunlight? And so these small problems, I believe we've started to unlock them or fully mitigate them. And it also sets that mindset of we are doing stuff to help with that MVP. And if anything, these help form the MVP of what a robot on Mars needs to do. It needs to be well designed. It needs to have different components that can deal with these issues. And really cracking this gives us that full baseline or skeleton of what that needs to be going forward. So let's coalesce a few things and specifically bring it back to what I'm envisioning and what a few of us across the world are envisioning as well. We want to explore, but there's risks. Robots can help. But with great power, there are some complexities that come off the back of this, especially if we're talking about life off Earth or specifically in Mars. So how does this work? Robots do the risky stuff, humans do the safe stuff. So project your mind to the year 2030. We're setting out to explore the Gale crater. We believe there could be evidence of water there caused by liquid streams. So this is an area that becomes quite a high intention for us to explore. It's also an unknown area because it's the first time that we as humans may be heading down there. There might be gas pockets. There might be microbial life that is actually a danger to us. Or the ground might just have air pockets that make it really unstable. So sending a human in the first instance is a little bit of a dangerous scenario. So we use robots. Specifically, I'll bring up the word TREX. It leads the way by a good 100, 200 meters away, using simultaneous location and mapping, looking at what the environment is, looking at the risk factors that exist, whether it be radiation or temperature or incoming weather storms. And it's the one that's ahead of the game, ahead of you, really feeding back the information about, yes, you should go ahead and do this. No, you shouldn't go ahead and do this. And so really the decision-making is away from the human, because after all, we're focusing on trying to breathe on a planet that we can't actually freely walk around with. And so obviously you start to understand that robots can do something and they can be the more proactive one, and we can be the ones that effectively hang back. And with this, I'll talk about a couple of, I guess, conceptual designs that help us really get ahead of the game. So this demonstration or this concept that is actually here highlights a couple of components that could form a really good concept going forward. It's using the Spot or the Boston Dynamics dog as a baseline, but it's been augmented with a couple of additional features. Given the fact that it may not be just one of these, it may be 2 or 3 that actually support you by way of swarm robotics, you need a communications ability. You want to be capturing different things along the way and using the hand the human hand may not be the best. So the ability to have robotic arms becomes quite important. We need redundancy. You don't want something that breaks in front of you. So that's why we've got 6 legs on this as opposed to 2 legs. Now, there are some difficulties that come with this, especially with the kinematic nature of how these need to actually perform. And so these form the complexities of what needs to be really drilled into after this. But effectively, the smarts and the sensors and the what we know as Internet of Things is really built into this. And this becomes our really intelligent platform. It needs to be a lot more proactive than we are. So quite a massive advancement of artificial intelligence is actually what we need here as well. But also it needs to be able to withstand the different conditions of Mars. And if we're thinking about Mars and beyond, this becomes the baseline measure of what is and what isn't possible. Now the processing engine, which is really where the difficulty needs to be unlocked and where I guess the pervasiveness of what safety means to us needs to be unlocked. And so you are using machine learning, sensor and data fusion, and neural networks, but a lot more advanced than what we have today. And if you look at the games like AlphaGo as an example, again, they're specific use. So you're looking at an AI framework that can do more than one thing at a time. The engine needs to learn for itself. And given the conditions on Mars are completely different to Earth, this is where the AI capability is almost mandatory. There might be training data sets from Earth that we can load it up with, but it may not be entirely relevant either. And this is where the complexity comes in. How do you operate a robotic device built on an AI framework based on stuff we just don't know at the moment? And so it might be simple in a context, but it's also difficult because it needs to learn for itself. It needs to learn to change the way it interacts going forward. And so there's a lot more complexity here. And it's an ever-growing area in terms of where artificial intelligence is heading. But it is really an area that needs to be unpacked. And it really forces that manual to semi-autonomous to autonomous nature of what robotics could be in the future. But then all this data, all this information that we're getting needs to be presented back in a really good use case. And this is where this concept of using augmented reality, but in the actual visor of an astronaut. So you've got your spot, you've got your drones, you've got whatever machinery or robotics you need to help augment and bring in different data sets. But you also need to be the one to see what's going on. But you don't want to have the decision making. You don't want to have to identify how all these different factors actually cause a risky scenario or a safe scenario. And so the ability to then, I guess, feed in data levels from, I guess, the health of the robotics they're using. Are there any upcoming difficulties or constraints or complexities that you're about to face? Where are you actually positioned on Mars? Are you actually heading towards a dangerous area or an uncharted area? The temperature, the radiation exposure. Do you actually want to know what part of your suit is at risk? Well, I think so. Having that ability to really assess that, but also look at your own vitals and change the interface to what you suit becomes quite important. And really, this is about coalescing all the different data points we have captured as part of the robotics and the TREX functionality to give you a bit more view of, I guess, what you need to know to make the smarter decisions. After all, we're not going to be able to do it ourselves. We're going to need to be augmented. I started this presentation about saying the words curiosity is ingrained in us all, and so is a desire to explore. And I thought this was a fitting note in terms of ending this presentation. These 3 and more have led us to unlock the realms of another planet, something I guess humanity hasn't done before these 3 have gone through. But then you look at Hope and all the rovers and the satellite spacecraft that are flying around Mars at the moment. We've actually unlocked a lot. And so we've unlocked something that we couldn't do ourselves as humans going across without major risks or fatalities. And so these 3 highlight that paradigm that robots can help us do the risky stuff and humans can do the safe stuff, albeit being humans at the moment are still on Earth, seeing what's happening on Mars. So it's not about taking away the opportunity to explore from humans. We're not going to be able to do that. It's just what we are and it's what we want to do. And it's our curiosity that drives us forward. It's about wanting to find the best way forward in a safe and sustainable manner where robots are our augmentation capability. And so with perseverance and how we're doing, and I don't mean perseverance of rover, but our ability to persevere towards such a paradigm, things will and can and are actually continuing to change. And to finish this off, Mars is there waiting to be reached. Robots have gone there. We haven't gone there, but we are heading towards that ultimate goal of colonizing, moving towards another planet, but robots not going to be our, I guess, they're not our Terminator situation where they're trying to remove us. They're probably our greatest assets going forward. And to that end, that brings a conclusion to my presentation, but happy to field any questions if there are any.